Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Amanda Blake. I first heard Amanda Blake on another podcast, and she just came across so eloquently talking about embodied leadership and embodied coaching, her work with neuroscience. I read a great paper of hers, which was on the Strozzi Institute website some years ago. She has a book that's won some awards around called Your Body is Your Brain. So I'm sure we'll talk about that. Online courses, founder of something called Embodied, various other things she's been involved with. So Amanda, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Where are you in the world today?
Well, today I happen to be in Michigan, in the southwestern part of the state near the lake. And I actually hail from the mountains of California.
Got it. And how did you get interested in the body? What was your journey into this?
Oh, well, I started my life as, actually, I was going to say I started my life as an athlete, but sometimes I tell a story that even predates that, which is when my mother was pregnant with my youngest brother, I got given a book about pregnancy and childbirth that showed, at the time, very, very cutting edge. They were just getting into the capacity to do photography inside the human body. And it just showed these amazing pictures. And I was like, that's what my little brother looks like. And so from the age of 2.5, I was interested in biology and the human body. And I also grew up in a medical family, and I grew up as an athlete. So for me, there's never been a time in my life where the body hasn't played a really, really significant role. What happened is, as I kind of fast forward in life and started to study interesting topics in college that interested me, what I really got interested in it was psychobiology and the relationship between who we are and how we behave in the world and kind of the underlying physical aspects of that. And much to my surprise, I sort of tripped into the business world and started doing a lot of business education, and then later circled back around to the world of executive coaching, and then especially body-oriented coaching. And so that's the work that I do now is body-oriented coaching from a leadership perspective, helping people make the difference that they want to make at work, and really leveraging the intelligence of their body to do that.
So I love how you call that body-oriented coaching, leveraging the intelligence of the body. How else do you explain this? So imagine, I know nothing about this area. I'm someone that's interested in coaching, and I hear you do body-oriented coaching, and maybe some of the misunderstandings I might get is, is that something sporty, or, are you going to fix my posture? And then you say, no. What do you tell people? Because I love how you describe what you do.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I don't know if I have a way. I remember years and years ago trying to describe what I did, and somebody said, "Oh, that's like yoga." And I said, "Well, no, not exactly. Although, there's some relationship or overlap there." And so sometimes I kind of jokingly, cheekily say, yeah, it's like yoga for the work. It's like applied yoga for the workplace in a lab coat, since a lot of what I do is science oriented. So I'll kind of jokingly say that. But really what I do and the outcomes that it helps produce is I help people get more effective with their responses to events around them and with their relationships with other people, so that they can achieve their goals, the aims they desire, and particularly so in the professional world. And I do that by primarily, not exclusively, but primarily by really helping people tap into a hidden source of intelligence that we all have, but typically don't know how to leverage, especially in ways that are really applied to behavior as opposed to like sport, right?
Mind if I jump in there? Something I think is going to be really useful for listeners here is how you describe what you do. So whatever they do, And you described it in terms of the result or the outcome people will get. And I just love that, because it takes people straight into like what's in it for them. You know, like it's so many times someone's saying, well, I do Reiki and it's this, and I learned from this teacher. And part of me's thinking, oh, I don't really care. You know, what am I going to get? But if someone says, I'll help you sleep better, I help people sleep better. And I'm going, great, I don't sleep well. Great. Okay.
Sign me up.
Then you say, and how I do that is, and then they're interested. Then they're kind of like, and I just want to just put this out to listeners, because I think it's a super useful little, not tricky, even just useful way of framing what you do, that any listener, like, so you're an Ashtanga yoga teacher. Okay, but what's in it for me? And then there's also that little bit of mystery there when you say like a hidden kind of intelligence, or a type of intelligence that most people don't know how to aspect, don't know how to access. My curiosity peaks and I go, oh, okay, so there's something I don't know that I could know that will help me with this thing. So it's like, I think particularly for the Europeans who listen, they tend to be less good at marketing. So I hope you don't mind me kind of taking apart a little bit how you did that, because I think it's really nicely done.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm happy for you to deconstruct that. And I think it's really important for those of us who have something really powerful to offer to be able to speak about it in terms that people who don't have your depth of training or experience in your particular modality can really understand and get their hands around. And my experience with that has been that very, very often when I describe what I do, people will want to connect it to something that they already know.
Yes.
And that's helpful for them because it gives them some framework or some way to understand. And it usually, I'm aware, it usually produces some misunderstanding in them, right? Like they're like, oh, it's like yoga, kind of like this person that
it's body language, it's mindfulness, it's
body
yoga,
language,
it's posture.
Right.
This is what we get as embodiment people, right?
Exactly. Like, and so that's fine. Like, I think people should connect it to what they know, and then having a conversation that helps them kind of expand their understanding of what they know to see that, well, there might be actually more possibilities here than you maybe were aware of or have considered. And
it's a kind of
that's one of the ways to talk about it.
Like, okay, so like body language, and body language is expressing yourself, but embodiment is also how our body postures, breathing and movement actually constructs who we are, or we can change who we are. Or mindfulness is great, but in embodiment, it's also changing. It's not just awareness. We might want to shift our state rather than just pay attention to it. Or in mindfulness, you might have to go sit in a corner quietly, whereas this you can do on the run. So I think starting with what people know, and then giving them the distinction to make it clearer.
Exactly. And all of those things that you described are things that I regularly find myself saying exactly like that. So yeah, it's great.
Great. Let's dig in this for a few minutes, just because I think it's so helpful for so many listeners that work with embodiment. It's like, how, what is that, people will say. And I heard you talk about, I think we both frame it as a type of intelligence. And another way you framed it there was in terms of effectiveness and relationship. Mm-hmm. So I find most people are interested in either the I, the we, or the it, right? So the I is like, this will make you happier.
Sure.
Most of the business types, I don't know about you, it tends to be, you'll be more effective. So it has to be like, okay, like what are your people, like what are your customers interested in, Amanda? Like when you talk to them?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it tends to be effectiveness in relationships at work. It tends to be leadership oriented, right? So I'll give you an example. Somebody who called me, I don't know, 6 or 9 months ago about a situation where there was a particular member of a team who was causing a lot of disruption and a lot of kind of headbutting disagreement as opposed to constructive disagreement, right? Disagreement is healthy, and getting diverse ideas on the table is the way we get better ideas. And there are ways to do that that are more effective, right? And there are ways to do that that can actually derail the team and move the project off course. And so this particular leader reached out to me and said, hey, listen, I'm not exactly sure what to do here. This individual is really behaving in a challenging way, and I need to find a way to kind of get the team back on track and also speak really directly with this individual about the ways their behavior is being disruptive. Now, that can be a hard and uncomfortable conversation to have. And so we walked through a number of different things that this leader could, actions that this leader could take in terms of what to communicate and how they were communicating, and especially ways that they could hold themselves and stand, move, breathe differently as that conversation is going on. And this is someone that I've worked with before and that has some exposure to the work. So it wasn't the first of these kinds of conversations, but that's an example of the kind of thing that people might call me with or want help working on.
Great. So they're coming with a challenge and it's like, hey, something's not quite right, or else why would they be coming for coaching, right? Or why would the HRB person be getting you in for the team? And then you relate what you do to that. So it's like, I think the magic word you said in the middle of all that was how. So they're coming there saying, I've got to have this difficult conversation. How am I going to do that? Like, for me, this is a key word in embodiment generally, is like people get there's different ways of doing things. And there's some that may get them results or may feel good or may lead to a connection, and others that don't. And they might not have a framework for that. Like you might introduce some neuroscience, we'll come to this, or some frameworks like centering or terms from, Strozzi or whatever. And they might not have that terminology, but they'd at least get, they have good days and bad days. They get that sometimes they're reactive and it's not their best self. Is this the kind of way you can kind of come into it?
I think so. I mean, one of the things that, this is a little bit different from what you were saying, but as I think about like what helps people step in to that how and like play with a different way of being, is that very often they need to be able to relax their intellect in a certain way, right? And then be able to go, okay, I trust this weird thing enough that I'm willing to try it. And so this gets back to kind of what we were talking about earlier, is how do you explain your work to people? And one of the things that I have found just enormously useful is to really, really deeply understand the biology that underlies, the neurobiology that underlies embodiment. So another example from my practice, this year I've been working with a physician who was really interested in, he's in a very, very high pressure job. And he really also is dealing with some people that he is very challenged by. And his reaction to that is to just kind of stay quiet. And he's been feeling like, I need to step up a little bit more, but also do that in a way that isn't, I don't want to be a person who goes around snapping at people, right? I don't want to be a person who goes around biting people's heads off. That's not the doctor I want to be. That's not the person I want to be. And so how can I deal with this very high pressure environment and some, occasional difficult personalities in ways that actually let me be who I want to be? And so part of what I was able to help him with was to go, look, here are a few tidbits about how your body behaves in relational situations. You probably didn't learn this in medical school because you were focused on, the anatomy and physiology of health and illness, right? So here is some anatomy and physiology about human behavior and relationships and some of the research that underlies that. And he went, oh, interesting. Okay, I see how if I practice this way of being where my jaws relax, my shoulders are open, in his case, right? Where I kind of have this particular mantra that I say to myself as I relax my jaw and open my shoulders, then I can step into more of my best self when I'm in these really high pressure situations.
Yeah. So sometimes people are kind of cognitive, they're rationally minded, and, fair enough. And just giving them that little bit of science, that little bit of explanation where they go, okay, that's giving me, I call it minimal trust. And then they go, yeah, you know what, I'll try it. I'll give it a go. And also you're embodying that. You come across as a fairly professional person. We've dressed the part. And, we're in that role, dressed the part, walking the part. And we give them that little bit of minimal trust. And they go, okay, it's a bit weird, but I'll give it a go.
Yeah. I mean, I think I love the phrase minimal trust, because I think that's what you want. I have another colleague who says, you just need to throw the intellect a bone, which I think is a really funny way to think about it. And I think it's actually really important as someone who, even with a lifetime of various kinds of body-oriented training, whether that was studying biology or being an athlete or studying nutrition, right? That I had all this behind me, and then it was a complete shift to start to pay attention to, well, what's my body doing when I'm failing to ask for what's really most important to me in my primary relationship, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how is my chest constricting, or my heart beating, or my feet tightening against the floor when I am bored in a meeting and wishing I could get out of there, or whatever it is, right? That's very, very, very different, as we know, from paying attention to the body as an athletic tool or machine, right? And so that's a huge shift for people. And it's really like a mental, I want to say paradigm shift, although that's so very overused, but it really is a very fundamental shift in understanding how our bodies play a role in our social and emotional life. And I think when people can get a handle on how that happens, you talked about the importance of how, and I agree that that's a much more important question than why, right? So like, how does it happen that you shut yourself down and withdraw from conversation when you really need to show up for it? Or how does it happen that you step in as an aggressive bully and then later completely regret showing up in such a self-righteous manner, right? How does that happen? And then if you understand how that happens, and not just what you're thinking about when that happens, but what you're sensing and feeling and how you're holding yourself, and then you have more places to intervene and start to make change, which, as you emphasized, is part of what this is all about.
So if people don't know how they're doing it, they can't do something different. I think Moshe Feldenkrais did something like this, right?
Yeah.
So that's the key piece there. They identify the granularity of the actions they're doing in the body, which underpin their more obvious actions of, say, shouting at someone or backing down, or, whatever the thing they're coming to you as a problem is.
Yeah. I think that's very, very well said.
And so what do you find, actually, let me say another question. So you're explaining this to a doctor. Now, I know from your CV that I've got in front of me here on the computer that you have is it human biology from Stanford? So you're pretty well qualified, I imagine there. Is there a risk in sort of talking to people that may be kind of scientifically orientated around, like, my neuroscience is pretty basic. I've heard quite a lot of neurobunk from coaches out there saying, this thing or that, 3 brains and this and that. And I go, God, no one's thought that in neuroscience for 20 years, have they? So, I mean, is there a risk in kind of talking about the science with some people?
Of course, there is a risk. And just as in whatever your profession is, you would operate in the boundaries of your own level of competence and training. The same is absolutely true about sharing scientific knowledge. And there is a ton of neurobunk out there. I love that phrase, and far, far too much of it. And I think it's well-intended, right? And it comes from people wanting to share tidbits of what they've learned. But I'm in the middle of teaching a course right now that I started off, as I start many of my courses for practitioners, I started off by saying, look, to be a responsible practitioner in the field of sharing science, here's some things you fundamentally need to understand about how to assess whether scientific information is accurate or not. And yeah, of course, there's a risk. I got corrected on something at a presentation I made about a year ago by a physician, and it was right. She was right. I had a misspelling in my slide, and it was a minor error, but it's not like I'm human and I make mistakes too.
Sure.
So there's always the possibility of stumbling. And I think you don't want to fumble around in the areas in which you're, where you're relying on science to offer credibility for what you do. It's really, really important that you've got the science right. And so don't just like read an article on the internet and then spout that. Like actually do your due diligence to really understand, not that you have to become a scientist, but that to really understand what, what do we actually know, and what is preliminary or old news or like that.
There's a humility, isn't there, in saying,
Yeah.
hey guys, I'm not a neuroscientist, and it was a long time ago. I did my psychology degree, and my understanding of the fight-flight response neurologically is this. And then you kind of almost framed it like, hey, I'm not the biggest expert in the world in this. And I've even heard some coaches very skillfully say, if anyone is a neuroscientist, please forgive me, or feel free to chip in, or even ask if the audience, is anyone a neuroscientist here? Go, like that's kind of like, I've seen that done skillfully. And also to know the research, as you say, like I've heard, Tony Robbins is still quoting Amy Cuddy. And it's like, there's no mention of the kind of replication issues there. And
right. And that's quite nuanced actually, because there is a piece of Amy Cuddy's study that has been unable to be replicated, which is the piece about hormones.
Yes.
And the piece that has been consistently replicated across many, many studies in the field of embodied cognition is the piece about psychological change, internal psychological change, and change in sense of agency. And so it's never, and this is the way that science progresses, right? It's somebody investigates something, puts it out there, people will look at it carefully and go, yes, we've done our peer review, we think this is solid, we're ready to go. We publish it. And 7, 8, 10 years down the line, statistical methods have changed. You've had a lot of time for replications to fail, right? And you go, well, this part holds water, this part not so much, right? And so we need to always expect that whatever science we're sharing today is going to evolve and change and get closer and closer, we hope, to the real truth of the matter. But it's never a done deal. And that's, I think, part of the beauty of science.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is a risk in relying upon science too heavily for credibility when it is constantly changing. So if someone's written a book and it said, okay, this is all about cortisol and testosterone levels, actually that's the part that hasn't been replicated, as you say, but equally there's other parts that have. And I tend to say that, these things are suggestive, but I think the real test with embodiment is always going to be in the trying of it, in the practicing, right? So it's like, let's rest our authority on that rather than someone's study that may be proved wrong in 5 years.
Wendy Palmer often says, I won't probably quote her directly on this, but I love her phrase. She says, well, why would you trust research over your own experience? Right? And I think that's really, really important to bear in mind, that we can humbly, as you say, point to the best our best understanding of the science as it exists out there and say, here's what we think, here's what we know so far. These things are not set in stone. They're still open to revolution and change, particularly in this area, A, neuroscience, and B, embodiment, both of which are really relatively new topics for scientists to be, social and biological scientists to be studying. And so neuroscience, not so much, it has much longer history, but certainly with the new machinery we have, right? Lots of new insights coming out. So all of that is to say, like, if you can kind of humbly rest a certain amount of credibility on the science, if you have that interest and knowledge and skill to do that, and then really use that only as a way to invite people into having the experience, because ultimately we trust our own experience as human beings. And I agree with Wendy that the best, in my view, the best use of the science is to help people step in and experience for themselves what embodiment has to offer them. And once they do, that tends to become very much, indisputable for the majority of people.
Right. They taste it, they try it, they go, you know what? I was stressed, now I'm not stressed. I did the centering, I sound different, I look different, I feel different. And they go, okay, it's the proof's in the pudding for them right there. Yeah, I think that's really true. People trust their own experience. And,
it gets back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the call, Mark, which is kind of what language do you use? What words do you choose? How do you frame your work to invite people in? And really, if you're incredibly good at standing in the shoes of your client or your prospective client empathetically and really understanding what they're up against, if they feel understood and seen and met, the science is just sort of like a kind of an interesting sidebar.
Right. I just want to be understood and got. Like, you get that I'm working 14-hour days and it's difficult in this company because there's a lot of politics and people, okay, I felt like you get that. Right, let's go to work.
Quick interruption to tell you about my book, Embodiment. Creatively named, hey? Actually, Embodiment Moving Beyond Mindfulness. You can find this online at theembodimentbook.com. That's theembodimentbook.com. So this book is an introduction to the whole field. If you like these interviews, you'll probably love this book. Funny stuff, poems, personal stories from my life, illustrating what embodiment is all about, and loads for professionals in the field too. Top teaching tips, language tips, that kind of thing. Yeah, a real condensation of everything I've learned about embodiment, basically. So you can get pre-orders at Amazon.com, and if you just put in Embodiment Moving Beyond Mindfulness, that's the name of the book, or go to theembodimentbook.com. On there, you'll see quotes from various teachers, a bunch of fun illustrations, and you can also get the first chapter completely free online at theembodimentbook.com. Enjoy, and back to the interview.
Let's hear your best shizzle, Amanda. I'd love to hear, what is your 101 explaining interpersonal neurobiology to people? I just want to hear it. I think everyone out there is going to love it. It's going to be so useful. What are some of the main pieces of sort of neuroscience you put out there?
Yeah. So, really, one of the things that I commonly say is that our bodies develop, our brain is distributed throughout our entire body. Our brain and our entire body evolved through, evolutionary biologists tell us that we evolved to have these bodies that are essentially antenna for social and emotional information. And we can't shut that capacity off. So we are walking antenna in the world, broadcasting and receiving signals all the time. And, because of that, we have this, like I said earlier, kind of hidden aspect of our intelligence. And one of the pieces of research that I rely on pretty significantly is this distinction between conceptual self-awareness and embodied self-awareness. And these are different processes in our neurobiology and neuromuscular systems. Both involve both body and brain, right? So conceptual self-awareness involves body and brain in a certain way along certain kinds of neural pathways. Embodied self-awareness involves both body and brain in a certain way along very different neural pathways. They operate quite differently, and they offer us different gifts. So conceptual self-awareness, or an awareness of our stories, our narratives, our history, our vision, our dreams for the future, our ideas, all of that involves the neuromusculature of the face, head, and neck, and the speech and language areas of the brain. And the gift of that is that our conceptual awareness can really take us anywhere in time. We can think about the past, we can think about the future, we can envision and imagine. And our embodied self-awareness, or our capacity to, feel ourselves in space right now, notice without needing to look where your left shoulder is in relation to your right knee, that's something that we feel and sense. And that sensory self-awareness takes us right here in time, because there's no other moment that we can experience sensation. And it also happens along entirely different neural networks than conceptual self-awareness. So all the way out to our fingers and toes, and slightly different parts of the brain are involved in embodied self-awareness. So we're actually activating different parts of our human capacity when we tap into each of these parts of ourselves. And we're really familiar with conceptual self-awareness. And generally as a culture, I'm not necessarily talking about the people who listen to this podcast on the regular, but generally in the world, we're really, really familiar and highly trained at conceptual self-awareness. And embodied self-awareness, as we know, tends to be harder for people and less familiar. And so really helping people step in can do several things. You mind if I keep going with just a couple more?
No, please.
So part of the neurobiology of embodied self-awareness is that some of the key capacities that go into it, interception, our capacity to sense our internal visceral sensations, proprioception, our capacity to sense the position of our body in space, those operate frequently outside of our day-to-day conscious awareness, right? They're just, all that's happening in the background, our heart's beating, our gut's doing what it does. And we're generally not aware of those things, but they have a huge impact, though all those sensations have a huge impact on our actions that we take in the world, because the sensations that we experience will be affiliated with either a sense of pleasure or displeasure, or a sense of desire to move towards or to move away from. And so these basic states will automatically affect the actions that we take in the world, the way we speak to people, all of that. When we surface that I talk about surfacing the invisibles, right? When we surface those invisibles for ourselves, for our clients, what it does is it opens the doorway to start to make different choices. It doesn't make different choices in our actions or behavior automatic. What makes those choices automatic is practice, right? So I often say awareness creates choice, practice is what creates capacity. And so when we sort of strengthen our interoceptive and proprioceptive senses, which, by the way, all that information is carried along nerve cells that are structured differently than the nerve cells that are involved in conceptual self-awareness. There is a biological reason why that stuff is generally outside of our conscious awareness. We need to quickly be able to respond to the world around us. And so anything that we can put on autopilot, we do, including things like the beat of our heart, right? Totally all makes sense biologically. When we can surface those invisibles, what we get is the possibility of responding differently to them and choosing our behavioral response in the moment. And it just gives people all kinds of freedom and flexibility that they, where previously they may have felt trapped by their own habits or their own
behavior.
So I'll pause there to take a breath, and you can respond and ask questions.
There's loads of great stuff there. So, and I like also you're emphasizing, again, the sort of part that could be controlling things that's mysterious. I think that people may not yet have surfaced. I think that gets people's attention. And then the piece there around more choice, more freedom. So framing things, instead of you're broken, framing it as like, hey, would you like more options? I think that framing tends to be attractive and non-threatening to people.
Well, and I also just fundamentally believe that very, very few of us are actually broken. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we go, oh, this bad habit, this thing that I've been doing forever and ever, I'll take one from my own life, right? I can be really indecisive, and it can really trip me up. And I write about this actually in my book, Your Body is Your Brain. And I have a whole chapter on my own indecision and how I actually have been able to change it significantly, although not all the way. And here's the deal. In the family that I grew up in, that level of indecision and kind of skipping over and not paying attention to what my own internal sense of the right way to go, that was incredibly adaptive in the family that I grew up in. You know, we were a large group. We the best way to move was kind of to go with the flow or to go with the group. That's what was rewarded. That's what brought love, right? So that doesn't mean that by my habit of indecision, I'm in some way broken. It actually means that I have this great strength of being connected in groups.
And this is really reassuring to people, isn't it? To go, hey, you actually have this superpower, and it was really adaptive then, and it still might be in the future. Mm-hmm. And do we want to add to that?
Well, and what do we, right? Like, so you're indecisive, and can you build the capacity to sometimes be more decisive? And the answer in my own life has been yes, absolutely. And I've written about that elsewhere. What I would say is that's not to suggest that, for somebody who has experienced some severe trauma, and that's rooted memories in their body, and I imagine, Mark, that you've talked about that quite a bit on this podcast, so that won't be unfamiliar to listeners, right? So if somebody has experienced severe trauma and that's rooted in their bodies, and they seem unable to get past that in some way, it's not to say that we don't also memorize, as it were, with our bodies, dysfunction and, really significant painful behaviors that can get in our way, addiction, right? As one example. So it's not to sort of cover over and be Pollyanna-ish. We do have real harms that come to us in life. And for most of us, most of the time, we tend to look at ourselves as broken way more often than we need to. And really, we can cut ourselves some slack and go, nope, nothing broken here. It's just a learned embodied behavior, and it's actually relearnable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in terms of the neuroscience or the biology, I'm imagining you talk a lot about stress. I know you work with centering. Like, how do you generally explain that whole piece? Do you talk about adrenaline levels or different parts of the brain? What's your way into that piece?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know that I talk about stress a whole lot. I talk about resilience, and I talk about building a capacity to return faster and more frequently to your best self, right? And that there are a lot of situations that we come up against in life that kind of challenge us from making it harder for us to access our best selves, and how can you return more and more frequently to your best self when you're under pressure, and when the stakes are high, and when the going gets tough, and all of that. So I don't actually tend to talk a lot. I used to talk a little bit about stress and overwhelm, and to be totally honest, I got bored of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's another nice way of saying it as well, isn't it? It's like, and people do get that they're different on different days. Like this idea of you have a better self, or sometimes I'll say, have you ever done anything you've regretted? And people say, well, of course. I'm like, okay, so how were you at that moment? And it's so
I want to bring you an example from my life. Please. Today, this morning, I am wrestling with I had a massive computer meltdown a few weeks ago, and it has, as anyone who's ever experienced this knows, it's resulted in like 10 million different, hair-pulling conversations with the support tech team and right? So again, this morning, I'm, trying to solve a technology problem. And let me just tell you, I was not my best self. And I was thinking about this podcast, and I was like, oh, Mark and I are meeting, and how am I going to shift gears and actually, return myself to a state where I'm excited to talk with you about the things that I care about and that I think are so promising and helpful to people. And so it's that kind of resilience. And let me just be clear that although I was able to recover this morning, I can't always. I'm not perfect, right?
Yeah, and there was a residue there as well, man. I was worried you were a bit pissed off at me at first.
Were you?
Yeah, because my secretary didn't put the link on, and I thought, it's not that big a deal, but she seems a bit pissed off about it. And I was thinking, all right, come on, it's not a big deal. And I don't know, maybe she's, And little known to me, it was something completely
No, it's
non-related.
completely different. And I'm
But it was
sorry
only
I brought
a residue. I think had I not been an embodiment teacher, I probably wouldn't have picked up on it. You were basically centered, amiable from the start, but I could
no,
smell
but
there was 1% stress in there somehow.
and I just want to say, like, one, I'm sorry I brought that 1%, and holy cow, from where I was, which was like hair on fire, head exploding, to only bring in 1% is an enormous victory.
You were civil, professional, articulate from the start. So do you know what I mean? That's a hell of a lot better. You should have had me on the phone to the electricity company earlier. They sent me a £3,000 electricity bill, and I'm sitting there with my mentee who's arrived early in the restaurant to meet me. And I'm thinking, I'm supposed to be a centering teacher here, She laughed when I said to them, I'm not a bloody Tesla factory, why is it £2,000? And, but it was definitely like, okay, at least I was relatively civil to the electricity company. I wasn't swearing, maybe today that sarcastic was the best I could do, So I think we cut ourselves some slack about this, right? Centering is not a cure-all.
It's not a cure-all. It's so totally not a cure-all. But what it can do is, with practice, and I would describe this as like practice being your best self. Like, do you actually know when you're at your best self, how you're doing that? Do you know what your signature is? That it has to do with relaxing your eyebrows or relaxing your jaw or feeling your weight in your seat. And I guarantee you one thing, it is more than taking a deep breath.
Right. Yeah, and I like this idea of not, because you can work with centering around the distress response and really identifying what that is. And that's really useful. Like Paul Linden's great at this, and we work with this, throw tissues at people and do grabs at Strozzi, different things. But I like this idea of also working with your best self, not just like, okay, that's you fucked up. This is how we unfuck you. Like we can also work with, okay, what's you at your best? Like, how do you do that? I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's really what I try to help my clients practice is, who are you at your best and how are you doing that when you're doing that? And what do you notice? I tend to try and help clients find what I call a keystone, right? So the stone that holds the whole arch together. And I try and help them find one thing. And for some people, it's like, I can really feel my hands. Or for some people, it is like, I can feel my weight in my seat, or I can feel my back against the chair. And then we practice that over and over and over again, but not just the physical practice of that. The physical practice of that, so embodied self-awareness, tied with conceptual self-awareness. Who is it that you want to be, right? So I've had clients, thinking of some recent examples, clients who, for example, will invoke the expansive feeling of being in the Serengeti, because that was a place where, that particular client felt really most herself and the person that she wanted to be in this particular workplace situation. Another client who came up with a phrase, "My purpose is service," right? So as he's feeling his keystone physical shift in his shape, which for him was to open his chest, he would practice just saying to himself, "My purpose is service," and open his chest. And there are just countless other examples like that. A client who needed to kind of disconnect from her to-do list at various points throughout the day, and definitely at the end of the day, so that she worked in a home office, so that she could be with her partner at the end of the day. And she would lean back, put her hands on her chest and say, "I am enough." So there's a physical gesture that goes along with sort of a belief or concept that one already holds about themselves, right? It's not, I would draw this distinction between something like this and something like an affirmation, right?
It's not just saying it. There's actually a somatic kind of shift with it as well.
There's a somatic shift with it. And it's also this, "I am enough," or "my purpose is service," or embodying the Serengeti. That's something that the client has already experienced about themselves. Like this is rooted in a real experience that they've had.
Okay.
Right. Moving into their actual best self, as opposed to an affirmation, which is like, I'm nice and people like me, or whatever, right? Which can be sort of layered over the top. It may not actually even tie to a person's real belief system. So you need to, I believe, root any sort of practice of, if you're going to practice being your best self, well, how are you when you're at your best self, right? Oh, well, when I'm at my best self, I'm relaxed and my shoulders are relaxed and I'm back in my chair and I just feel like I'm enough. And then we go, okay, well, let's practice that.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Right? And then clients go, it's not working yet. I'm like, well, how many reps have you done?
Right. This is the practice piece, right? Like Richard's great on this, Ginny Whitelaw's great on this. Yeah. I always say with my students, generally the answer is either going to be it depends or practice. Mm-hmm. Almost any question is one of
those are pretty much the two answers.
Yeah, I just wrote a book on embodiment, and in there the word practice, it was an argument with my editor, because my editor was trained in American English. It's slightly different around verb and noun of practice. So we had a disagreement, and we had to highlight every use of the word practice. There was something like 78 uses of either the verb or the noun a practice or to practice in the book. And we're like, that's how important it is to this work, right? We're constantly talking about it.
It is central. It is absolutely central. And I think it's something that, again, the listeners of this podcast will really understand this, but sometimes our clients will not. Like I've had many clients, especially because I do work in the business world and people don't necessarily have exposure to this. I have many clients who find themselves disappointed with themselves or concerned about the process we're going through because they feel like they're not getting it fast enough.
Right.
And I always point them to, this is like learning to play the piano or,
sports, driving a car, languages.
Right. Accurately swing the golf club or whatever it is, tying it to something that they maybe already do in their life. Like it just doesn't happen the same way as intellectual learning. And it requires, an investment of time.
Right. And most people,
the benefits are, sorry?
Most people do get some example, right? When you talk about the sport, the language or driving, they get there's a difference between learning about something and learning to do something. The procedural knowledge versus the cognitive knowledge, right? Like people get that. Yeah. Okay. Any other sort of things you tend to go to quite often with clients? So this individualized sort of best self work I really like. Talking about the power of practice, giving them a bit of neuroscience to go, okay, yep, let's give it a try. Are there any sort of classic go-tos you find yourself working with a lot?
I tend to use this integrated intelligence model, which, and this may be a little complicated for the 3 to 5 minutes that we have, but the idea behind it is, we have these different perceptual capacities. I've already talked about interception and proprioception, and exteroception is another, our 5 senses and paying attention to the world around us, conceptual, emotional, and there are others, but I emphasize those 5. And when I'm working with clients, I tend to really try and look through every one of those lenses and make sure that I'm really surfacing the invisibles for the client in each of those domains, and then helping them see those invisible pieces for, again, like how they're being at their best. How can they practice that more often? As well as seeing those invisibles for the places that they can get tripped up, or that they're struggling, or that they're, afraid of going into the conversation with the disruptive team member, right? And losing their cool, right? Like helping them kind of surface invisibles on each of those 5 domains so that they can, again, as we've discussed, like create more choice and freedom for themselves in the actions that they take. So that's a very high level summary, but hopefully that's helpful.
That's great. It's great. And to finish on the neuroscience, any neurobunk myths that you just want to smash now while we've got a chance? And what's the sort of most common nonsense you hear? Most common
Nonsense is it's a little bit hard to choose. You know what, I'm gonna choose one, and quite frankly, I am almost certainly guilty of this because we don't have great language around it. But the idea that the body or the brain produces our experience, or the brain lights up and therefore we are taking some action or having some experience, and a really classic one is the idea of the amygdala hijack. That's a useful idea. It's not altogether wrong, but it's also not altogether right, because it's more complicated than that. Which, if the two answers are it depends and practice, when it comes to neuroscience, the one answer is, well, it's more complicated than that.
Yeah.
In order to understand it, we do have to kind of oversimplify it, unless you yourself are a neuroscientist. So it's important to kind of hold everything as like, this is a model for understanding what's going on. The map is not the territory. So if we take the idea of an amygdala hijack as just one example, a lot of people mistakenly think, oh, I'm having an amygdala hijack. This is all happening physically, and that the physical sort of wiring in my nervous system is why I'm having this experience. And the actual fact is there is zero, and I do mean zero, causal evidence that our body produces our experience. And there are still huge philosophical mysteries about the relationship between mind and matter, or consciousness and physicality. And the best we can really say, I believe, is that we know that there are neural correlates of experience. And we know that when we have certain experiences, on average, in certain populations that have been studied, there are lots of others that haven't been studied, we can say, on average, we see the amygdala light up more often when people are in fear, danger, stress, right? And so on average, there appears to be a correlation there, but not I'm having an amygdala hijack and therefore I'm afraid.
Right. Yeah, this causes that. Yeah. Yeah, not as simple as that.
That's not as simple as that.
So it's complicated. It's basically, that's going to be my neuroscience speaks from now on. Okay, I'm going to put a picture of the brain up on a PowerPoint and say, listen, guys, it's complicated.
It's complicated, but we think we know some things, and they seem to point in the direction of, do some behavioral learning through the body. You might find more freedom.
Got it. Well, man, let's move towards wrap up here. I'm glad your computer's held out and is working fine for this interview. It seems to have caused us no problems at all for the whole interview. Where can people find you? I found some good stuff yours online. Where should they go?
Yeah, so the website where you can find my work is embright.org, EMBRIGHT. In other words, embright's actually an interesting word. It was sort of a defunct, obsolete word, but it is a real word, and it means to lighten up or embrighten or make more shiny. So that's where that comes from, and there are lots of free resources at the Embright website. You can also learn more there about the book, Your Body is Your Brain, and how to order that. We actually, I don't know exactly when this podcast will be broadcast, but as we're recording it, we are getting ready in the next probably week or two to launch the paperback edition of that book. So if you don't do that yet, keep an eye out, and very, very excited to announce that and share that.
The ABCs of embodied transformation there.
Yep.
The audio downloads and the neuroscience of change. Yeah, that was Joe Monk interview. That was a good one. That was a very good one.
There's another resource that may interest people that I don't think is very easy to find on the website, and that is if you go to embright.org/wisdom-within. There are two ebooks there bundled together, and they sort of offer, I get asked a lot, how did you learn how to do what you do? Who do you recommend I study with? Obviously, I'm happy for people to come study with me, but there are so many great teachers out there. And Mark, I think you do a fantastic job culling teachers from many, many disciplines. So this is another resource, a guide that sort of has some of my best recommendations, as well as a number of different practices from teachers that I admire. So,
yeah, we've had a bunch of them on the podcast. We'll say Wendy Palmer, Doug Silsby before he died. Arowana we had on. Stacey I actually spoke to a week ago, but we haven't had on. Ginny we had on recently. And Richard we haven't yet had on, but we've got him hot off the press news booked for the conference. So the Embodiment conference. So
fantastic.
Just been confirmed. So very, very cool. Okay, Amanda, closing message about the body.
Oh, closing message about the body. We have this deep hidden intelligence that too often is ignored. And when we surface those invisibles and get better at paying attention to our embodied state, we not only enter into more freedom and choice. For many of us, we also enter into a deeper experience of the biggest mysteries of life. And you might call that by many names. I just like to leave it at a mystery. And it's connecting, it's deep, and it's beautiful. So
thank you for joining us today.
Some ways to get more, to give back, and to get more involved now. So the biggest request I have would be to share the podcast with your friends, people that you think would really enjoy it. Email it to them, put it on your social media, tell them about it, old school. Really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support us financially, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/embodiment podcast and give us $1 an episode. And I'd say they're well worth $1. So that's less than £1 if you're in UK-ish. So yeah, please go there. On the embodiedfacilitator.com website is where this is hosted. If you're, most people I think listen to for iTunes. iTunes, we'd certainly appreciate a review. The way iTunes works means that a review means more people will find it. iTunes regards it as more important for searches. So even a couple of sentences review really does help as a little thank you to us. And if you want to go to embodiedfacilitator.com, you can see the actual, links to the sites. There's comments on there. The Facebook group tends to be where people discuss things. So if you go to put in the Embodiment podcast into Facebook, there's a page which is relatively quiet and a group which does have some discussion on. So I will reply to things personally there. So also on embodiedfacilitator.com website, there's all sorts of freebies there. There's videos, there's free ebooks, there's ebooks you can buy. And of course, there's our newsletter list. If you want to stay in touch and learn about things like the Embodied Facilitator course and our next Embodied Yoga Principles teacher training, then go to that website and you'll see a little pop-up and you can get the newsletter through there. Okay, so I think they're the main ones. Tell your friends, pay us some money on Patreon, give us a review on iTunes, send us your email if you want to be on the newsletter list, and get involved on the Facebook there. Bit long. Pick whatever you like that works for you. Until next time, welcome home to the body.